Tennis star Jeļena Ostapenko, once celebrated for her fiery spirit and Grand Slam triumph, is now making headlines for a reason no one expected. In a shocking courtroom scene, Ostapenko completely collapsed after hearing the devastating sentence handed down against her. The dramatic moment left those in attendance stunned, as whispers of her downfall spread like wildfire across the sports world. How did one of tennis's brightest talents end up here? And what does this verdict mean for her future? Today, we uncover the full story. The countdown to judgment. The collapse inside that tense courtroom was not a sudden breakdown, but the predictable outcome of months, if not years, of building pressure. Jejena Ostapenko, once hailed as a Grand Slam champion and one of tennis's most exciting young stars, entered the room not as a celebrated athlete, but as someone weighed down by controversy. Her fiery temper, once considered part of her competitive charm, had slowly eroded her reputation until she could no longer escape the consequences. It all began with that infamous outburst at the US Open against Taylor Townsend. In just a few heated seconds on the net, Ostapenko's harsh words sparked a wildfire of criticism. The clip was replayed endlessly, dominating sports media and going viral far beyond tennis circles.
American Taylor Townsend clipping the top of the net, then going on to clinch a win against Jeļena Ostapenko of Latvia.
What might have been dismissed as a single emotional lapse became the centerpiece of a growing narrative that Ostapenko had crossed a line. Sponsors were the first to retreat, quietly pulling their support to avoid association with her behavior. Soon after, tournament organizers kept their distance. Fans began debating fiercely online. Was this simply passion misdirected, or proof of deeper disrespect? The Women's Tennis Association took it further, opening a formal review. Complaints piled up from umpires, fellow players, and even spectators, each recounting moments of verbal clashes, mistreatment of ball kids, and outbursts that blurred the line between competitive fire and outright misconduct. By the time disciplinary hearings were announced, Ostapenko had already lost control of her public image. No longer was the conversation about her explosive forehand or her 2017 French Open triumph. It was about her character, her choices, and whether she could be trusted to represent the sport at the highest level. Legal advisors warned her that the situation was serious, but even they underestimated just how decisive the ruling might be. The courtroom atmosphere reflected the weight of the moment. WTA officials sat stone-faced in the front row. Journalists filled every corner, eager for the headline that would define her career. And there sat Ostapenko, visibly diminished, her hands clenched tightly on the table, her once fiery presence now subdued. This was not a tennis match, where a second set could offer redemption. It was the ultimate test of accountability, and her entire legacy was on trial. But what exactly was the sentence that brought Jeļena Ostapenko to her knees in open court? And how did the tennis world react when the verdict was finally revealed? Keep watching as we unfold every detail. The suffocating tension within the courtroom. The courtroom on the day of Jejena Ostapenko's sentencing was nothing like the arenas she had once dominated. There were no cheering fans, no pounding of feet on the stadium floor, no tension of a championship tiebreak. Instead, a heavy silence hung in the air, pressing down on everyone present, sharp and unyielding. From the moment she stepped inside, dressed in muted, understated clothing and avoiding eye contact, the contrast between this nervous figure and the confident, fiery champion of the courts was impossible to ignore. Photographers jostled for angles, cameras flashing, while reporters scribbled furiously, hungry for every detail. In the front rows, officials from the Women's Tennis Association sat with somber, unreadable expressions. The courtroom itself seemed designed to strip away the glamour of sport and replace it with the weight of responsibility. Polished wooden benches, the elevated seat of the presiding judge, and the soft murmur of whispered conversations creating a tense, almost theatrical stage. Here, talent mattered less than accountability, and Ostapenko's career hung in the balance. She sat rigidly, hands clenched in front of her, eyes occasionally flicking toward her legal team, mostly lowered, absorbing the gravity of the moment. Gone was the fiery champion, replaced by someone bracing for the consequences of months of controversy. Those who had followed her meteoric rise and public outbursts hardly recognized her. The bold, fearless star seemed fragile under the weight of judgment. Beyond the courtroom walls, the world waited. Social media buzzed with speculation, live updates streamed from every outlet, and fans argued over what punishment she might face. Inside, the tension was almost suffocating. Every person in the room felt it. This was no ordinary disciplinary hearing. It was a defining test. A moment when the sport of tennis sought to hold one of its brightest stars accountable, proving that even champions were not above the rules. The silence, charged with anticipation, foreshadowed a verdict that could reshape not just Ostapenko's career, but the very image of tennis itself. If her collapse on court marked the end of her story on the court, could it also spark a new era of accountability in tennis? And what legacy will fans truly remember? The delivery of the verdict. When the presiding official rose to deliver the verdict, the energy inside the courtroom shifted in an instant. The tense silence that had lingered for hours grew heavier, almost suffocating, pressing down on the chests of everyone in attendance. Every eye fixed on the elevated bench as the words began to roll out, formal, deliberate, and unmistakably grave. The decision was clear. Jejena Ostapenko, once a Grand Slam champion and global star, was banned for life from professional tennis. Her eligibility to compete on the WTA Tour was permanently revoked. No probation, no return, no appeal for redemption. The reaction was immediate. A wave of stunned whispers spread across the room, reporters leaning forward in disbelief, pens scratching frantically across notepads. Even those who had predicted harsh consequences seemed rattled by the finality of it. Suspensions, fines, temporary bans. These were the familiar tools of discipline. But a lifetime ban? That was rare, almost unthinkable. This wasn't a penalty, it was an erasure. For Ostapenko, the words landed like blows. At first, she sat frozen, her hands trembling against the wooden table, her posture sinking as though the weight of the sentence was physically crushing her. Cameras zoomed in, capturing the exact moment she buried her face in her hands.
The last match they played 18 months ago, what I noticed, Andrea, in a full 3-set match.
Shoulders trembling, head lowered in surrender. The fierce competitor who once shouted at umpires and stared down rivals was suddenly reduced to silence, her despair plain for the world to see. The official pressed on, citing repeated violations of conduct, discriminatory remarks, and ongoing behavior incompatible with the integrity of tennis. Each phrase cut deeper, hammering home the point. This was no single lapse, no heat-of-the-moment mistake. It was a pattern, a record too damning to overlook. By the time the verdict was fully read, the message could not have been clearer. Tennis was drawing a line, sacrificing one of its champions to protect its values. Was this justice served as the harshest punishment in tennis history? And how will the sport be remembered for banishing one of its most controversial stars? The collapse that shattered her image. The decisive moment of Jejena Ostapenko's downfall was not simply in the words of the verdict, but in her body's raw, unfiltered reaction to them. As the final judgment echoed through the courtroom, the mask of composure she had fought so hard to hold shattered before a sea of cameras. She leaned forward, burying her face in trembling hands, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably. Witnesses described it as a visible collapse, the exact second when denial crumbled, and the weight of reality pressed down without mercy. No longer the fiery competitor battling rivals across the net, Ostapenko became something entirely different. A figure crushed by consequences she could neither outplay nor outrun. The silence of the room was broken only by the hurried scratching of pens, the relentless clicking of cameras, each sound marking another piece of history being recorded, every tear glistening on her cheek, every shaky breath, every desperate grip of the wooden desk was captured. It was the image of a career imploding, an image destined to replay across global headlines for days. For those who had followed her journey, the scene carried a sharp sense of tragedy. Here was the same woman who, at just 20 years old, stood fearlessly on the clay of Roland Garros, lifting the French Open trophy with unshakable pride. That memory of triumph now collided with the stark picture of a woman consumed by regret and vulnerability, unable to withstand the storm of her own making. Her collapse symbolized more than a personal defeat. It was a chilling reminder of how quickly glory can unravel when behavior overshadows achievement. In that single courtroom, Ostapenko's dramatic fall from grace was complete. The strong-willed persona that once defined her had evaporated, leaving only despair, fragility, and the undeniable truth that no victory could shield her from accountability. The breakdown did not soften the sentence, nor did it sway the ruling. Instead, it burned a lasting image into the sport's history, a champion undone not by a rival's power, but by her own unchecked choices. Was this the moment tennis gained back its integrity, or the moment it lost one of its brightest, most troubled stars forever? The reactions beyond the court. The fallout from Jejena Ostapenko's sentencing was swift, far-reaching, and impossible to contain. Within minutes of the verdict being read aloud, breaking news alerts flashed across global media outlets. Social platforms lit up with an avalanche of reactions. Clips of Ostapenko's dramatic courtroom collapse, once a Grand Slam champion, now reduced to tears and despair, circulated worldwide. These images quickly transcended the boundaries of sport, capturing the attention of people who had never watched a single tennis match. To many, her breakdown became a powerful symbol of accountability, finally catching up with stardom. Players past and present added their voices to the storm. Some extended sympathy, pointing to the immense mental strain that life on the tennis circuit demands. Yet most agreed that this outcome was about more than one bad moment.
Number in the two hardcourt matches that Ostapenko has won against Swiatek, Ostapenko has saved.
It was about a repeated pattern of disrespect. Naomi Osaka, long admired for speaking on integrity and fairness, emphasized that this ruling reflected years of choices, not just one emotional outburst. Rafael Nadal, usually measured in his public statements, issued a rare comment of his own, reminding the world that respect is non-negotiable in tennis, and that even legends are not above consequences. Corporate sponsors who had already backed away from Ostapenko seized the opportunity to double down. Major brands released statements underlining their commitment to the values of professionalism, equality, and inclusion, drawing a clear boundary between themselves and the conduct that had dragged her reputation down. For the Women's Tennis Association, the ruling was framed as not only necessary, but unavoidable. Officials explained that the decision came after months of investigation, citing a consistent pattern of behavior that eroded trust and left them no choice but to act decisively. Among fans, opinion was sharply divided. Some argued that the punishment was too severe, questioning why no path to redemption remained open. Others felt it was long overdue, applauding the move as a bold message that athletic talent does not excuse a lack of respect. Despite disagreements, one truth united nearly everyone. Tennis had reached a turning point. Ostapenko's lifetime ban was more than the downfall of one player. It was a defining moment for the sport itself, one that forced tennis to reckon with deeper questions of ethics, discipline, and responsibility. Rarely had a ruling drawn such a bold line in the sand. Talent may win trophies, but conduct secures legacy. Was this the day tennis protected its integrity, or the day it lost one of its most controversial stars forever? The spark that lit the fire. Jejena Ostapenko's downfall didn't begin in a courtroom. It began with a single match. The year was 2019, and the US Open should have been another stepping stone in her career. Facing Taylor Townsend, fans expected a standard battle, not a turning point that would echo for years. But frustration boiled over. Disagreeing with a series of calls, Ostapenko erupted at the net. Her words weren't just sharp, they were personal, cutting, and undeniably cruel. At the moment, it was only a few seconds of rage, but the cameras caught everything. Within hours, the clips were everywhere, trending on Twitter, dissected on sports blogs, replayed endlessly on YouTube. Commentators slowed it down frame by frame, analyzing every glare, every syllable. For her, it had been a bad day. For the world, it was confirmation of what some fans had already whispered. Her temper wasn't passion, it was poison. The fallout came swiftly. Sponsors who once draped her image on billboards and commercials began to distance themselves. Their press releases spoke of values and professionalism, but the real message was simple. They no longer wanted to be linked with her name. Tournament organizers grew hesitant, and invitations were fewer. Even press conferences turned tense as reporters pressed harder about her behavior than her performance.
But that was a fantastic serve. We can see it. It goes straight. If you can control your body serve.
What had started as one ugly moment snowballed into a narrative she couldn't control. Stories trickled out of locker rooms and practice courts, clashes with umpires, harsh words toward ball kids, training sessions that dissolved into shouting. It no longer looked like a meltdown. It looked like a pattern. Fans became divided. Some argued her fire was no different from legends of the past, but others saw an athlete consumed by anger, letting rage bury her talent. Conversations shifted. People stopped talking about her forehand or her chances at another slam. Instead, they debated her character. By late 2020, the Women's Tennis Association could no longer ignore the storm. They opened a formal review, combing through footage, compiling reports, and pulling every warning and fine from her record. The result was undeniable. Not one outburst, but a history of disregard. Would Ostapenko's downfall remain her personal tragedy, or become the spark that forced tennis itself to change forever? A new era of accountability. The implications of Jejena Ostapenko's sentencing stretched far beyond her personal downfall. They reshaped the very landscape of tennis. The ruling was more than a punishment. It was a precedent. It sent an unshakable message that disciplinary measures in the sport were not empty warnings or symbolic gestures, but real boundaries with consequences too heavy to ignore. For younger players climbing through the ranks, the verdict landed like a warning bell. They now understood that a career could collapse not from losses on the court, but from choices made off it. One reckless outburst, one repeated act of disrespect could dismantle years of training, sacrifice, and achievement. Coaches, tournament organizers, and even sponsors felt the tremors. Suddenly, codes of conduct were re-examined, media training reinforced, and expectations of professionalism rewritten. The world was watching, and the sport could no longer afford to look away when its values were tested. Beyond the logistics of policy, a deeper cultural reckoning began to unfold. The case sparked fierce debate. How much pressure can athletes truly bear? When does fiery passion cross the line into hostility? And at what point does misconduct stop being dismissed as heat of the moment and start being recognized as a genuine threat to the integrity of competition? For many, Ostapenko's collapse inside the courtroom became the defining symbol of this shift. The image of a former champion, once celebrated for her fearless energy, reduced to visible despair under judgment, illustrated the fragile nature of legacy. It was a stark reminder that greatness is not measured only in trophies or titles, but also in the character displayed when the spotlight burns brightest. As the dust settled, one truth stood undeniable. Tennis had changed. The sport had drawn a line it could no longer retreat from. For Ostapenko, the collapse marked the end of her story as a competitor. But for tennis, it signaled a new beginning. An era defined by accountability, respect, and the demand that true greatness must extend far beyond the scoreboard. The question now is, will future stars rise to meet this higher standard or risk repeating Jejena Ostapenko's downfall? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more shocking stories.